Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. Between Tuesday the 5th and Thursday the 7th of September 2023, the UK Society for Research Software Engineering held its annual conference in the Welsh port city of Swansea. On offer was a full programme of plenary sessions, poster presentations, the annual general meeting and plenty of workshops, of course not to mention a series of social events. Additional satellite events took place on Monday and Friday the same week, and if you booked yourself into them, and I did, it all came up to a full week's worth of action. To get ready for the first satellite event, the RSE leadership meeting on Monday the 4th of September, I arrived in Swansea on Sunday late afternoon. At the time, the UK was in the grip of a late summer heatwave, and Swansea and the Bay Area were bathed in sunshine and warmth. On the way from the train station to the campus area, Mike, the taxi driver, gave me a brief history of the campus. Because Swansea University, founded in 1920, has two campus sites. The Bay campus, which is the location of the conference, was opened only in 2015 after having been acquired from British Petroleum in 2009. And so, in the spot where you find academic and student accommodation buildings today, there were once, and not so long ago, oil refinery tanks for a BP transit site. The Bay campus prides itself of being the only campus in the world that is that close to a beach. And just as well that during the entire week of the conference we were blessed with a clear sky, sunshine and warm weather, and quite a few of the participants took the opportunity to take a plunge into the sea. But back to the conference. There were two satellite events on Monday, one for trusted research environments and another for the RSE leadership meeting. I attended the latter, and we had a good round of discussions, for instance, on the subject of equality, diversity and inclusion. After the session, I caught up with Jamie Quinn from UCL in London. Jamie and I were colleagues during my time at UCL. He is also a trustee of the Society of Research Software Engineering in the UK, with his term ending this autumn in 2023. Being a trustee is a great opportunity to contribute to the RSE community, of course, and help keep the charity running. Here's what Jamie had to say about his experiences as trustee and some useful tips for new ones. You're one of the trustees, aren't you?
Yes.
And your term's coming to an end.
Yes. So I'm drinking tea in between these yeses.
So how's the year been for you then?
This year's been very interesting. I took over the kind of organisation of both the EDIA, the Equality, Diversity, Inclusivity and Accessibility group, as well as the Role Diversity group. Although they sound like they'd be quite similar, we tend to do similar kind of activities and surveying and workshops and that kind of thing. The two groups actually do represent different things, EDIA being more on the characteristics of people. What kinds of people do we have? Who do they identify as? Who are the people?
And how diverse are we then?
Not particularly.
If we're brutally honest.
If we're brutally honest. I think we're going from the stats I remember from, I think one of the RSE surveys, we're slightly better than software engineering, but certainly the fields that are typically dominated by straight white men. There's a stereotype, and the stats do show that there's still dominance there. And RSE as a profession generally is better than this, but we're still nowhere near some of the more balanced. In terms of gender specifically, it feels like psychology tend to have better balance, at least at certainly the undergraduate level, maybe the PhD level, less so at the top. But yeah, so I mean, the EDIA group has been really interesting. I think it's been one of the things I'm proud of is we have managed to transition it from previously it was mostly trustees and this year it's mostly community, which is excellent. This means it's far more sustainable. It's a group that will last beyond just the terms of specific trustees. And it's been great having these diverse voices and having people who are focusing just on this one thing. They've chosen, I want to be part of the EDIA group. I'm going to do that. That's just going to be my focus, my volunteering focus. Whereas being a trustee, you have lots of different focuses.
We're voting in new trustees, I think, tomorrow. But what kind of advice would you give for new trustees based on your experience from last year?
Based on my experience, would be I would argue for focus. I came in and I joined a few of the different subgroups, a few of the different working groups. I ended up really contributing very little to all of them because I was spread quite thin. And it's a natural human inclination to get involved in lots of things that you're interested in. Yeah, I would say just focus. Pick one thing ideally, two things is probably realistic, and really focus on it. Really give your time and your energy to that. And I would also say, don't be scared to break things. Don't be scared to do,
What did you break then?
I haven't broken anything specifically, but, I mean by that, don't be scared to not follow a process or some way of doing things. It's easy to just follow the status quo, but I think there are often better ways of doing it. And how can we know if we don't just experiment? Different ways of organising groups, different ways of meeting, different, these kind of things, the kind of just practicalities and logistics of organising a group of people.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jamie, and have a nice conference.
Thank you very much, Peter. You too. The
conference proper kicked off on Tuesday with a set of impressive keynotes, one of which was from Dan Katz from the US. The US RSE Association has grown significantly in the recent years and will indeed hold its own and very first conference in Chicago mid-October 2023, where I hope to catch up with Dan then. The other keynote was given by Gaël Varolko from scikit-learn. Scikit-learn is the major Python library used in machine learning and AI today, and you may as well use it yourself. And Gaël gave a very emphatic presentation on how we should use our skills for making our lives and those of others better. And I had the great pleasure and privilege to talk to Gaël after his keynote. But before we come to his keynote, we first discussed where his name comes from.
Gaël comes from the same root in the Gaelic language. It's a Celtic name.
Oh, is it? Is it from the Breton region?
Yeah, exactly. It's from the Breton region.
Is Breton actually a separate language?
It is. It's from the Celtic root, like Irish or Welsh.
Oh, right, okay.
I don't know it, right.
Which is a totally different conversation.
Yeah.
So, Gaël, thanks very much for your time today. Maybe you can quickly introduce yourself.
So I'm a research director, which means I'm an academic researcher at INEA, the French Computer Science National Research. And there I lead a team that's interested in data science and machine learning for health and social sciences. And I also lead the scikit-learn team there, software engineering.
Yes, exactly. And scikit is something that you presented today. So I think it was a very emphatic presentation and very thought-provoking for me. I think there are two aspects that I want to home in on. So one is that we did a lot of progress in computing and programming in particular to shield complexity from users, because complexity stops people from getting into it. But on the other side, we're shielding people from a complexity that makes it maybe even harder for them to understand. So it's easier to use, but then there are only very few people who understand the complexity. Do you see that in that terms?
What does complexity mean? Do you understand the quantum mechanics of the electrons in the CPU? Well, no, probably not. We don't understand how CPUs are built. So yes, there is always, layers of complexity. And science in general and technology is about managing complexity. We can't fit in our brains everything that's been understood by people. So we always build narrations that are simplifications. And I think this is part of the scientific endeavor and the technological endeavor. How can I indeed present to you simplified versions that allow you to be operational?
The question came up because you talked a lot about machine learning, and of course machine learning is sort of the big hype at the moment. There's a lot of press coverage. Is AI taking over the world? And I was just wondering how much of the complexity of machine learning systems should people be able to understand, or should they just treat that as a black box?
People have a finite amount of time. So when we say people, who are we talking to? Of course, you always need to adapt, but it should be as simple as it needs to. I would rather these days have people understand potential biases of data? How do you trust a validation? And then the inner working of a machine learning algorithm. I don't think that's that important. And I actually think very few people understand these inner workings. And that's fine. You don't really understand the car that you drive. It's fine.
You can still drive it, basically.
Indeed,
you can drive it responsibly.
Yeah. You should understand how to drive this car responsibly. That is very important. You don't need to understand the engine of the car.
So using technology responsibly was basically sort of also an important part of your talk. If we go back to machine learning, and you highlighted that, I think quite correctly, that machine learning was used a lot in advertising and political manipulation as well. So how can we, as technologists, make sure that it's being driven responsibly? What kind of contributions can we make?
I think we need to pick up problems that we see as valuables, and then we need to see what those application problems lead us to in terms of technology. We're going to find that our tools are imperfect for those problems, probably. And if we find that our tools are imperfect, then we can improve our tools. If we find our tools are perfect, then we need to advocate for them. Something I certainly wouldn't do is to fight against the usage that I don't value. I wouldn't fight against ad. I would rather fight for good applications, because this is what, as technologists, can do, create better tools.
So this brings us to the societal impact. Because you also spent a lot of time talking about the non-technical aspects of our work, and in particular in terms of advocacy and community building. Could you take us quickly through what you've done in your field?
I think I've done a few things in community building, but I guess I was more part of a broader group. It's about assembling people with a shared vision, at least partly shared, and making sure that they work happily together and produce something. One thing I've learned is that the vision is really important, and here broadcasting the vision, I'm more talking about technical vision here, because this is how you assemble people. So you need to find a vision that's broad enough to assemble people, and then it's about making sure that the communication works well, that the rules of the game are somewhat well set. And here it's important to realize that the rules of the game are set partly by social norms. So it's how you behave, in which behavior you tolerate or do not tolerate.
Your scikit-learn, for instance, has a huge following, and there are professional developers, but then there's a huge amount of contributions coming from outside. So how do you manage that?
So indeed, people who don't work for me, but that's good, because I am not scikit-learn. The scikit-learn has its own purpose, and so people should work for scikit-learn and not for me. Just like a civil servant doesn't work for the government, the civil servant works for the state, and the government is only the steward of the state. For scikit-learn, there's a part of it is, a duocracy. People come with their own agenda. We have a vision statement that says what is accessible in terms of scope of the project. If it falls in the scope of the project, then it may go in. Of course, there's a back and forth looking at the technical aspects of the contribution, trying to gauge the complexity of the contribution compared to the value added for the user, and this is a difficult question. Now, how do we balance full-time developers with part-time developers? It's not really about being paid or not paid. It's about being full-time or part-time. The full-time developers ideally should do more of the really big projects, because they require full-time commitment. You can't implement broad change in the library without dedicating a lot of your time to it. They should also do a lot of the maintenance. There's a lot of work which is akin to cleaning the dishes. And if you run, an organization with volunteers, you learn that it's good to have some paid people to clean the dishes, because this is what makes the community work better together. So things like doing a release, making sure that the tests are never failing, those are things that the full-time developers tend to do more. Not that we don't accept contribution on this. It's just that when something needs to be done, the full-time developer has to do it.
Maintainers and the full paid workers basically help to keep the code clean and avoid adding additional unnecessary complexity to it?
Avoiding the complexity is a continuous process. You always need to find the right trade-offs. You need to advocate against complexity. We always understand better the complexity that we bring than the complexity that others bring. So our ideas are never too complex.
Yeah.
And so this is why discussion is important. And it's a difficult one because you need to put in the balance the complexity or the maintenance cost with the value to the user. And both things are hard to define.
You mentioned that you yourself had to do a bit of a learning journey from learning democracy. Could you expand a little bit on that, how that journey went and what brought you to that point?
Well, Scikit-learn was going well. We had people who joined us whom we didn't know originally who were contributing to the project. It was really exciting and I felt passionate about it. And at some point, the group disagreed with me on some technical aspect. I don't even remember which one, but some technical aspect I felt very passionate about. And I felt this is an utterly wrong decision. It shouldn't be done. This is bad from a technical perspective. And then I realized that if I was too stubborn in this discussion, everybody would leave. And after a while, I ended up realizing that if a bunch of really clever people disagreed with me, they couldn't be fully wrong. And that major disagreement was probably just a minor detail.
Yeah.
But what I really learned there is that the process of discussing is more important than the specific choice that is made. There's this wisdom of crowd. Here, it's not really a crowd, it's a bunch of experts. But there's a wisdom of experts. And if someone in this group of experts feels very strongly that he or she makes better decision and cannot listen to other people, it's going to be a major problem for the project.
Well, I would argue that probably the community then starts to fail, doesn't it? When people stop listening to each other.
This is where one needs to take an active role in trying to ease the discussion and potentially override the problematic person. It's difficult, of course. We work a lot by consensus in Scikit-learn, and so we try to avoid this happening. Sometimes it's important to stress that frontal opposition to a group of people is not productive. And sometimes it's okay to lose people who don't understand this value of discussion.
If I were a problematic person in a group, which can happen, and probably did happen, then it's easy for me, it's not easy for me to accept that, but it's sort of important for me to realize that I need to be able to let go. I need to be able to accept that other people hold different opinions, even if I think they're wrong, but to yield to their opinion and accept the process. Because I think what we're talking about here is accepting the process. There's a majority vote. The majority voted for this. And I don't like it, but I accept it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. This was very hard for me. And we didn't have a voting procedure back then, but this was very hard for me. And we see sometimes people who formally accept there's been a vote, but then they just keep coming back at it, and always and always. It's difficult. We care about what we do, and it's often hard for us to, when we have a strong technical opinion, to decide that another way is possible.
Well, that's a nice finish. Well, thank you very much, Gaia, and enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Using our skills responsibly was also the theme of Neil Chu Hong's keynote, which he gave towards the end of the first day. Many of you will know Neil, who is the director of the Software Sustainability Institute, and he emphasized that it is time for the RSE community to move on to the next level, and he laid out a set of principles he suggests should guide us in our work. And here now is my conversation with Neil. Hello, Neil. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, Peter.
And thank you very much for the keynote which you gave on Tuesday about what's next. Just for the listener, perhaps in a few words, what do you think is next for the RSE community? What should we focus on next?
As I described in my talk, it's wonderful to see how the RSE community has evolved over the last 11 years from
that first meeting in a room in Oxford, and a lot of great work has been done by lots of people since then. But I think where we are now is trying to move away from the discussions of what an RSE is and what an RSE looks like, and instead to embrace the fact that we are a very diverse community. We have lots of roles, different people working in different organizations for different types of projects, and move on to thinking about why we do research software engineering itself, and thinking about the purpose of what we do as research software engineers.
What is it that you would like us to focus on?
I've been trying to think about the why we do research software engineering, and trying to come up with a set of principles which help either an individual or a project or a group or an organization understand how they can improve the why they do research software engineering. What I mean by this, it's 3 different categories that I've been thinking about. So one is the things that you can do that help improve things for your team. So that might be making your software fair, that's findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable, making it secure, and ensuring that you're identifying anything where there might be problems if personal information got leaked or something like that, and making your software maintainable so that other people, your teammates included, can adapt it, evolve it, extend it, and maintain it. And then I think the sort of next level up is around doing things which will be good for your peers and the research software engineering community. That's things like making software more reproducible so that people have trust in the work that research software engineers do, making sure that all of the different contributions and roles that are part of research software development are recognized and rewarded so that we can also take through the next generation of research software engineers, and making things inclusive. So recognizing that we need to work on accessibility and ensuring that we recognize that there is a diverse set of different contributors and ways of contributions. But I think the things that I've really been thinking about, how we go beyond these sorts of principles, which a lot of people may already be following in some way, and thinking about why research software engineering, what's its place in helping humanity and society and the world. And so I think the final 3 principles that I've been thinking about and that I'd love to get feedback on from people are around being responsible as research software engineers. So that might be environmental responsibility, or understanding the bias that might be coming into any of the software that we're producing, being open and global, and recognizing that research is not really bounded by disciplines or country boundaries, and making sure that things are as open as possible to ensure that the most people can benefit from the research and the impact of that research. And then finally, to be humanist, to recognize that software is just a tool, and what we really should be concentrating on is understanding how it benefits us humans as tool users, recognizing that it is the impact of the research more than trying to make a tool that is great for a very small number of people or just for a big machine or corporation. And what I'd like to sort of see is an understanding of how we can take the first steps in this. And maybe it's a bit like being more environmentally responsible. It's clear that for environmental responsibility, the burden and most of the work should go to governments and large corporations, but there are things that individuals and communities can do to help. And I think it's the same for research software engineering. There are steps that each individual, each project can take based on these principles that will help improve the perception and the impact of research software engineering. And I think that can only be a good thing.
You earlier said that we should get away from thinking about who we are and what we do, because we kind of sorted that question out. It's now 11 years after the term research software engineering was termed. Do you think we're obsessing about it?
I think we are. I mean, I don't think we've solved it. I think we could continue those sort of discussions for the next 10 years. But I think they're no longer the most important question. There are obviously still discussions about what is an RSE and whether certain jobs are part of the research software engineering profession. But I think we can go beyond that to talk about other issues that we have around increased recognition and the way that we broaden the pool of people that we have coming into research software engineering.
So, in other words, it's time to move on.
I think it is time to move on, or at least to look forward.
The second day of the conference was dedicated to tutorials, hackathons, and workshops covering a wide range of subjects, from a carpentries workshop looking into delivering training with no internet connection, over HPC walkthroughs, to international RSE groups. In one of those workshops, a group of RSEs looked into how we can aid RSE careers and career paths with coming up with a competency framework. In the break, I had the chance to catch up with Sarah Gibson from 2I2C, who took part in it. Sarah and I talked quite a few times on this podcast, so here she is. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, nice to see you again.
Is this interview number 4, or is it number 5, or is it number 3? No, it's not. It's more than number 3.
Yeah, I think this is number 4.
Okay, this is number 4. So
Yeah.
you got one on Mark Turner.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, we have this on record. I keep
Yeah.
that in.
Yeah, good. Got a leadership table going.
So this is day 2 of the RSE conference in Swansea, and you went to a workshop. So we went to 2 different workshops. I went to the one on sustainable digital education, and you went on the unconference on competency framework.
Yeah.
What was that about?
So RSE skills competencies toolkits. So this is actually ongoing work from the collaborations workshop that happened in May this year, where during the hack day, some folk got together and started talking about what skills are used across like the scope of research software engineering, and can we build a framework through which we can define certain roles, we can like grade our skills against, we can create pathways from moving from one level to another level, collect training resources around that to help each other, you know, make these kind of transitions and kind of like more solidify some RSE based career paths.
And can we create a framework? Because, I mean, roles are quite diverse. Maybe the roles aren't, but the situation and the jobs of universities and where they're embedded can be quite diverse.
But I think that's the point, right? Any framework should account for this kind of diversity, and there should be links and pathways to move through that diversity. I don't think the diversity of RSE roles we see is actually an issue. I think it's a feature.
Were they the beginnings of the development of a framework?
Yes, it was. It's still in its very early stages. So this initial work happened in May. It's September now. It's only like a few months old. I think the team had pulled together a good list of skills so far. Definitely room for improvement, and very keen to get input from the community to find out, are these the right skills? What skills are we missing? And I think that would make like a really good community engagement campaign, which I suggested to them. And I think it would just be like a fun thing to fill out and get your little radar plot of where your skills lie.
I'd like to continue on this theme of competency framework with a chat I had with Hannah Williams from the UK Health Security Agency, where she works on modelling. Just before our conversation on day 3 of the conference, Hannah was awarded a prize for impact on the RSE community, which we will talk about at the beginning of our conversation. Hello, Hannah.
Hello.
And congratulations. I think that's the first thing that we need to talk about is the award that
Thank
you've
you.
just been receiving. How are you feeling?
I was a bit shell-shocked, to be honest. Preparing to give a plenary session at the same time as being surprised by something lovely was a bit of an emotional overload.
The panel in itself, of course, was very interesting because it was about industry experience of RSEs and how they do things in the private sector. But what I want to talk about is the workshop that you've been at yesterday about competencies and competency frameworks. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so the idea, or the actual product that is in a prototype state at the moment, came about after the Software Sustainability Institute collaborations workshop earlier in the year, so 2023. A couple of people had been floating an idea about putting together some competencies framework to help RSEs work out where they were, where they wanted to go, what learning and development they could do for themselves. And I think from the original group, it was quite a focal point that actually this was a resource that was going to be useful for people who wanted to come into the RSE community who weren't necessarily RSEs to start with, almost to combat that sort of imposter syndrome of, I don't know what I need to know because I've not heard of this role before or what's involved. So there's several different use cases that we'd envision. So there's sort of like the personal development side. There's the team side of things where we might envisage that people collect profiles from within their team to build up a picture of what their team looks like. And then we'd hope to sort of also host a curated set of resources on there.
What's the outcome then? So is there going to be, I wouldn't say manual, but like something that people can look up and say, this is what an RSE should bring along or train up for?
I think we've heard during the conference this week that actually defining an RSE is difficult and we don't want to be exclusive. So I think in some of the on-conference sessions yesterday, there was talk about maybe just calling it a research software competencies kit to cover the huge variety of roles that exist within the RSE world who might not necessarily explicitly be RSEs. We've got a prototype website which sort of demonstrates how we anticipate using the tool. So the idea is that you can build up a profile, which is like a multicolored wheel containing different competencies and then skills under those competencies. I think we're up to about like 50 competencies.
Oh my God.
Yeah, there was discussion yesterday about whether there needed to be more or how granular you make this thing and the different levels of the competencies as well. But we didn't want it just to be like a purely technical wheel. The interpersonal, the teamwork, the project management skills are equally important in what makes an RSE role or an RSE type role.
It sounds a little bit like herding cats. So in the sense that cats featured quite big at this conference today. There was a lot of discussion about cats, but I digress. Is it not difficult to actually come up with a framework because it's so diverse really across the field, across different organizations?
Absolutely. So there are lots of frameworks that exist for different professions and we're trying to use those, but also we've identified maybe areas where they're not complete. Several people have brought up about the Sophia Plus framework, which I think might need to check where that's from. Yeah, so there are lots of frameworks that exist, but there are sort of areas that either don't apply to RSE type roles or that are just completely lacking in those frameworks. It's not that the idea is that you should have the top level ranking or competency level for all of the skills. There are so many different types of RSE that we don't expect everyone to have a 5 or a 7 in every skill. Like that's just not feasible and that isn't the aim. I guess that's why we've ended up with loads and loads of skills. And yeah, as I say, it's still a prototype and a work in progress. And the on-conference sessions yesterday, I think were really good in identifying other use cases or specifics that we'd missed or maybe ways of alternatively categorizing all these skills.
People can look up this on the website that you're going to share.
Yeah, we've got the GitHub repository that was essentially the output from the collaborations workshop. So if you search in GitHub for the RSE toolkit, it's a repo called RSE Competencies Toolkit. There'll be commits from Dave Horsfell and others, but it should be fairly easy to find. Again, we can put that in the notes. We've also got a Slack channel called RSE Competencies or Competencies Frameworks, and there's a distribution list, email list as well. And we would really love to hear from people, whether they're team leads, intermediate team leads or technical leads, or new to the profession, new to the roles, new to teams, because we want this to be a tool that works. Loads of people developing their own competency frameworks, career pathways and things, and it would be lovely if we could not fully standardise, because we've got to appreciate that different sectors, different organisations have their own career tracks or frameworks themselves which you're sort of obliged to follow. It's sort of an additional support tool that we want to be of use, so we would love to hear from people.
Organising a conference like this with 350 participants on site and another 50 online is no mean feat. And later on, we'll hear from one of the many volunteers, Becky Smith. But in addition to the volunteers, the conference and indeed the RSE Society itself rely on sponsors, like for instance UKRI, EPCC Software Sustainability Institute, to name but a few. And one of those is Oracle. Rich Pitts from Oracle Research has been a loyal follower of the RSE community, and I had the pleasure of meeting him last year in Newcastle and now again here in Swansea. Hi, Rich. Thanks very much for your time today.
That's fine, Peter. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, of course. And you're working for Oracle, and you've been quite a loyal supporter of the RSE community.
Absolutely.
For quite some time.
Oracle for Research has been set up now 2.5 years, I guess. And prior to that, Oracle Sales in higher education was interested in what the RSE was doing as a means of understanding the market for universities and getting involved with them. The lovely salesman involved who decided this would be a good thing involved myself and Mike Riley to actually get to do a presentation with Matt Williams, because Matt was using OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, to demonstrate cluster in the cloud. So this is way before OCI was really a thing with research. There's a lovely gentleman who worked for Oracle at the time called Phil Bates, who engaged with Bristol University and is now working for Bristol University. So it's quite funny, but it's all very intertwined. Matt did a demonstration of Cluster in the Cloud, early versions of Cluster in the Cloud running on OCI at the Birmingham conference, which was the last conference before all the lockdown and stuff. But then Mike Riley and I joined Oracle for Research, and I just think this is a really important community. Without the use of research software engineers to support principal investigators and the deep thinkers, who may be deep thinkers but completely impractical when it comes to doing stuff on computers, with having these people to support them, the research just goes that much smoother. And I really think this, as a quasi-professional body for this group of academics, is really worth supporting. It helps to focus people's minds on the processes and requirements of doing good software in research. And for the projects that Oracle for Research have been running with people across Europe, the most successful projects undoubtedly have good software engineers on the team. You can tell that. And Bristol is a great example, where you've got Matt Williams and Christopher Woods supporting a whole set of researchers. We've done quite a few projects with Bristol now.
I think you mentioned, and I overheard that yesterday, so I hope you didn't mind that I was eavesdropping, but I overheard that you also had a collaboration with the University of Newcastle. Did I get that?
Well, yes. I mean, yesterday the Newcastle team presented here at RSE, didn't they? That is such a worthwhile project. We were able to provide them with a grant for the research to host their website, their databases and their AI tools. But Oracle for Research isn't just giving money and running away. When they were started, Mike and I, with one of our other researchers from another project, trained all the RSEs in Newcastle on how to use OCI, and a sort of 101 quick start for them. So we did a day's training, and then Mike, working with the team, Kate and Robin and Francis, is there for then to support them all through the year of the project, and has done quite a lot of work in supporting them in setting up MySQL database service and some of the AI Jupyter Notebook tools that we have available on Oracle Cloud.
In addition to presentations and workshops, participants also had the chance to present posters about the work they're doing. And indeed, there were a number of interesting poster presentations, one of which was by Janetta Steen, Colin Saucy and Abhishek Dasgupta, titled "Carpentries Offline, Running a Carpentries Workshop Without the Internet," for which the team was rightly awarded a prize by the RSE Society. I was also interested in two other posters that focused on open science, open software and fair principles. One was by JOSS, the Journal of Open Source Software, and the other by Fair Sharing. And I was able to meet with Milo Thurston from Fair Sharing to talk about his work briefly. So hi Milo.
Hello.
We're sitting here in the Great Hall with the posters, and you did a poster on Fair Sharing. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Certainly. Specifically, we were discussing the Fair Sharing Assistant in our poster, which is a new project we've been working on these past 6 months or so. And now we've got it to a sort of beta stage where we're trying to get as much feedback as we can.
So what does the Fair Sharing Assistant do?
It's a separate web application, a client to our fare sharing API. So I ought to explain what fare sharing is, of course, which means that I have to explain what the FAIR principles are. I'll be very brief on those. There's enough information about them for listeners to find. But basically the idea that research output should be findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. So the fare sharing project aims to assist people in making their projects fair by finding resources for them that could help them do that. For example, databases where they could upload their data that might have a data preservation policy or that might mint a DOI for them, that sort of thing.
So how does the assistant help then?
The big difficulty with this sort of thing in fare sharing is basically we've got 5,000 or so records in a site with a complicated search interface. And often we get people emailing us saying, such and such a journal has told me I need to make my data fair, and they've got a policy on it, and I should check fair sharing. I don't understand. Where's the button I click to upload my data? So we've been thinking for a while, what we need is more a sort of a wizard or something like that users could click a button corresponding to a question they might have, such as, where do I upload my X-ray data, or what sort of databases might accept submissions of genetic data, or something like that.
What's been the response so far then from the poster? You said you had a number of hints because you're in the beta version?
People are very keen to see it. I think that's the sort of thing that would be very useful to the community. But the thing we've often encountered so far in our development is people's questions are often very, very specific, and we don't always have the information necessary. Today, for example, someone was looking for a database based on the criteria of how much data and in what format they could upload. But this is quite difficult for us to record. If you don't mind me mentioning for a moment our curators, the way fare sharing works is people may submit their resources, or we might create entries for them and contact them and ask if they'll come and support them. But we rely upon a mostly volunteer team of curators to keep the things up to date with human curation. And a lot of the time they have to end up visiting websites of resources, trawling through the information, saying, what is the data policy of this site here, and what can you upload, and what's their schema, and having to email them and saying, you're looking for this information about your resource, can't find it. Perhaps you'd come to our site and add it in yourself. A lot of work for them, and often the data they find is inconsistent or missing, so we're limited in what we can curate.
Finally, how can people reach you, and how can people test it for themselves?
We're available at fairsharing.org, and the assistant is at assist.fairsharing.org. On our main website, there'll be contact details for us. We're on Twitter, I still view it as, even though I believe it's been rebranded somehow, and Mastadon, you can find us there too.
As mentioned already, this conference would have been absolutely impossible to run without a number of dedicated volunteers and conference organisers, who are too many to name individually. Right on the last day, and while the team was clearing up the conference site, I had a chance to catch up with one of them, Becky Smith. Hi, Becky.
Hello.
Well, thanks very much for volunteering. You must be glad it's over now.
Yes, but I'm also wondering what the hell I'm going to do with all my time.
You drop into this void, you know, after that.
I've done it before when I've organised events much smaller than this. And I'm like, I'm so looking forward to the break. And about half a day in, I'm like, right, I better start planning the next one. I'm bored.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you certainly weren't bored during this one, I hope.
No, definitely not. People were very nice and kept me very busy.
Okay. I want to go back to the first day, which was the leadership meeting. And something that struck me was, and I think it was something we need to start in school, training people up to become programmers. And you said, well, actually, people may become programmers a lot later on in life. And I just wonder if you want to share some thoughts on that one.
I didn't do computing at school at all. Did the sciences so I could go into medicine and didn't. Went into customer service role that I hated, but I didn't have qualifications good enough to do anything else, I thought. So I just thought that was kind of the way things were going to go. And it was only when I was in my early to mid-20s that I got an interest in computing at all and decided to go to college to do hardware, and then realised that software was so much better. And then from there I got my degree and went on to become a secondary school teacher.
Oh, right.
And a college lecturer after that, and then I became an RSE, which makes it sound like I'm possibly about 90 years old because I've had so many careers, but I'm really not.
I can testify to that.
It's been an interesting route, but the idea is, yes, we should get more young people involved in producing software, particularly groups that are underrepresented, which was the area that we were looking at. But that's not the only answer. We can get people and let them know that this is a career you can start at any point in your life if it's something you want to do.
And how do you think the RSE community can support that?
It's a difficult one. The more I explain to people what I do, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. The more we talk about who we are and the things that we do and the really exciting projects that we get to work on, then the more people will start to think, oh, is that maybe something I could do? And just generally spreading the word. We're already doing really good work in that area, but we can't talk about ourselves enough. And that's really the only way that we can get anybody at any age interested in doing what we do, is to let people know that we exist.
And aim into that. But I think, first of all, thank you very much for this great conference. I know that you and the others have done excellent work, and so thank you very much for that.
It's been an interesting thing to be a part of. It was my first year on the organising committee, and there's been so much work done by so many people in the background, and it seems to have gone okay.
This conference has been an eventful and, for me personally, an impactful event. Not least because, thanks to the vote and confidence of the members of the UK RSE Society, I was voted in as a new trustee of the society together with 6 other candidates. That's quite a mandate and a privilege. And there's also some big shoes to fill, and I can only hope to do the role justice in the coming months. There is, after all, lots to do. I would also like to say a big thank you and give big hugs to all the volunteers. They put in an enormous effort to ensure a smooth running of this conference. There were a couple of unforeseen events, but the team managed to sort them out quickly, so hats off to them. There will of course be a conference in 2024, and for the next year the conference will once again return to the city of Newcastle, and I hope to see you all there and then. In the meantime, goodbye. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.